Welcome to HorrorBabble. We're back again with another weird tale courtesy of the great Robert Bloch. The Fiddler's Fee, which first appeared in Weird Tales back in July of 1940, was described by the magazine as follows: genius for sale, at a price that could not be repaid in all eternity. We hope you enjoy it. The Fiddler's Fee by Robert Bloch. 1. The door of the inn swung open, and the devil entered. He was as thin as a corpse, and whiter than the shroud a corpse lies in. His eyes were deep and dark as graves. His mouth was redder than the gate of hell. His hair was blacker than the pits below. He dressed like a dandy, and he came from a fine coach, but it was assuredly he, Satan, father of lies. The innkeeper cringed. He had no fancy to play host to this emissary from darkness. The innkeeper trembled under Satan's smile, while his eyes searched Satan's person for signs of a tail, of cloven hoofs. Then he noticed that Satan carried a violin case. It was not Satan, then. The innkeeper breathed a silent prayer of relief. It was only momentary. A minute later, he was trembling with augmented fear. If this was not Satan, this man who looked like the devil and carried a violin case, then it must be Signor Paganini, whispered mine host. The stranger inclined his dark head with a slow smile. Welcome, quavered the innkeeper, but there was no smile on his face. It was almost as though he preferred confirmation of his first fear rather than this. Satan one could deal with, perhaps, but the child of Satan. Everyone knew that Paganini was the son of the devil himself. He looked like the devil, and many were the diabolical legends concerning his unholy life. He was said to drink, gamble, and love like the Prince of Darkness, and to entertain an equal hatred of all men. Certainly he played like Lucifer. In that case under his arm he carried an instrument of hellish power, a violin whose sublime singing drove all Europe mad. Yes, even here in this tiny village, men knew and feared the strange and terrible legend that had grown up about the destiny of the world's most famed violinist. New and fantastic stories were continually pouring in from Milan, from Florence, from Rome, and half the capitals of the continent as well. Paganini murdered his wife and sold her body to Satan. Paganini has formed a society against all God-loving men. Paganini's mistresses are offered in the Black Mass. Paganini's music is written by the very fiends of hell. Paganini is the son of the devil. Legends these might be, but the atrocious conduct attributed to the maestro, that was fact. His scandalous amours, his disgraceful attitude toward the great and the nobility had been confirmed time and time again. Gossip, slander, malice, these things were in part. But one shining truth remained. No one had ever played the violin like Niccolo Paganini. Therefore, the innkeeper bowed despite his fear. He sent a lad to change horses and serve the driver of the coach, ushered Signor to the best room, and awaited his presence in the parlor of the inn with a carefully prepared table. Another awaited his presence as well, the innkeeper's son, also called Niccolo. Young Niccolo knew even more about the great man than his father. The lad knew more about the violin than anyone in the village, with the exception of Carlo, the wine merchant's son. Both boys had studied at the local conservatory since early childhood, and there was keen rivalry between them, between their families, each of whom fostered the budding genius of their heirs. Now Niccolo awaited his glimpse of the great man. What a triumph over Carlo! What a thing to talk about in weeks to come! Perhaps he, Niccolo, might even speak to the illustrious musician, might, if the saints were kind, receive a word in return. But that was almost too much to hope for. Paganini was not interested in boys. Still, Niccolo was determined to see him. He did not fear the legends. So the lad waited working on the preparations for the meal in the kitchen with his sensitive ears attuned to the sound of footsteps on the stairs above. They came. Paganini sat in solitary splendor at the great table of the inn. No other customers were present to stare at the great man, and he seemed oddly content to be alone, he who loved applause, adulation, obeisance. His thin, hawk-like face, singularly satanic in the lamplight it was, cast a black blurred shadow on the wall behind. His carefully curled hair rose in two horn-like projections against that shadow, so that the innkeeper noticed it as he entered, and nearly spilled the wine. Paganini ate and drank sparingly, as fiends do. He said never a word, nor did he exhibit the humanity of smile or scowl. When he had finished, he sat back and seemed to stare into the candle flame. It was as though his eyes turned homeward, to hell. The innkeeper left the room, crossing himself. This silent guest was indeed a son of Satan. In the passage he came upon Niccolo, staring at the pale violinist. "No, no, come away," the father whispered. "You must not." But Niccolo, moving as one entranced, entered the parlor. A voice that was unlike any his father had heard came almost mechanically from his throat. "Good evening, Signor Paganini." The eyes left the flame after partaking of their glare. A long, deliberate glance pierced Niccolo's face like a dark lance. "The whelp knows my name. Well, I have heard much of you, Signor. Who in Italy does not know the name of Paganini? And fear it," said the violinist gravely. "I do not fear you," answered the boy slowly. His eyes did not fall when the maestro smiled his wolfish smile. "Yes," the voice purred. "Yes, that is right. You do not fear me. I feel that. And why?" "Because I love music." "Because he loves music," parroted Paganini, cruelly mimicking the intonations until the statement stood naked in its triteness. Then, slowly, as the stare came again, "But you do love music, boy. I feel it. Strange." A hand reached out, a pale ghost of a hand with great sinews that hinted at delicate strength, however paradoxical that might seem. The hand gestured Niccolo to a seat. The hand poured wine into a glass. The hand drummed on the table slowly. "Do you play?" "Yes, maestro." "Play for me, then." Niccolo raced to his room. The beloved violin rested against his heart as he ran back. "It is such a poor thing, maestro. It does not sing." "Play." Niccolo played. He never remembered what he played that night. He only knew that it came to him, and he played as he never had played before. And the face of Satan smiled through the music. Niccolo stopped. Paganini asked his name. He answered. Paganini asked of his teacher, his practice, his plans. Niccolo answered all questions, and then Paganini laughed. The innkeeper, listening in his turn in the passageway, shuddered when he heard that laugh. It was a laugh that cracked through the earth and came up from hell. It was the laugh of a sobbing violin played by a fallen angel in the pit. "Fools!" shouted the maestro. Then he stared at Niccolo. Something inside the lad begged him to turn away, but as he had before, the boy returned the stare until the master musician spoke. "What can I say? Should I advise you to go to a good teacher, buy a better violin? Should I even give you money for that purpose? Yes, but to what end? You have the gift, but you will never use it." Paganini sneered. "You may be competent. You may even win small fame, a certain amount of success, but true greatness you cannot achieve through teacher or instrument or training. You must be inspired, as I was." Niccolo stood trembling. He knew not why. There was a horrible conviction in the words he heard. It frightened him, that hint of certain authority, of final knowledge. "A man must compose his own work, play his own work," the voice went on, "and no human teacher can give you that gift." Suddenly, Paganini stood up. "My pardon. I forgot. I came to this place because I have an appointment nearby. I cannot keep the one I must see, waiting. I shall go now, but thank you for your playing." Niccolo's face fell. He was convinced that in a moment or so more the maestro would have revealed something to him which he very much wanted to know, for Niccolo felt as Paganini did about his work. He knew that within him lay great talent, knew that any ordinary training would subdue that talent in channels of mere mechanical perfection. There was a bond between his humble self and the greatness of the master before him, and if only Paganini had spoken! Now it was too late. The black cloak swirled as the violinist went to the door. Then, in a rush of ebony, Paganini swept back the garment as he turned. Wait. He stared, and Niccolo felt his soul lifted and examined and torn and probed by the red-hot pincers of Paganini's eyes. "Come with me. We shall keep our appointment together." An almost audible gasp issued from the passageway at the end of the room. Niccolo knew it came from his father, listening. But he did not care. As the door swung against darkness, he moved to the musician's side. They left together. "I will apprentice you this night to a true master," Paganini whispered. 2. It was a long walk up the mountainside to the Cave of Fools. The road was lonely in the midnight, but then it was always lonely, for men hereabouts feared the cave. The devil was said to dwell in its mists, and the cave itself was unexplored by those who deemed its depths led down to Tartarus itself. It was a long and lonely walk, and the way was strange amidst winding paths and twisting passages of rock. Yet Paganini never faltered. He had walked this way before. Now the bony hand gripped Niccolo's brown fingers in an icy clasp so filled with cold, inhuman strength that the lad shuddered. But he followed through the steam and mist and fog that hid the clean light of the stars, followed to the mouth of the cave, as though impelled by the magic of Paganini's voice. For the maestro spoke all that way, and spoke without reticence. Sensing a kindred soul, he revealed. "They say I am a spawn of the devil, and that is a lie. All my life they told me so, even my father, cursed fool. In the academies my fellow students made the sign of the horns at me, and the girls fled screaming. They screamed at me, who lived for music and beauty. But at first I did not care. I lived for my work, and I worked hard. Always I felt within me that spark glowing to a flame. And then, when I made my first appearances, I came again into the world of men. My music was acclaimed, but I was hated. Child of the devil, they called me, because I was ugly and my temper bad. I tried again to drown myself in work, but this time it no longer sufficed, because I knew my playing was not good enough. I had genius, but I could not express it. After a while, one begins to reason. My work was not enough. The world hated me. Child of the devil, why not? I knew the way. I studied. I read the old forbidden books I found in the great libraries of Florence. And I came here. There is a legend of Faust, you know. There are ways of meeting powers that grant things to men in return for an exchange. They entered the cave now, and when Niccolo's hands trembled at the words, the musician's grip tightened. "Do not fear, lad. It is worth the cost. 13 years ago tonight, I was just such a lad as you, perhaps a bit older. I came this way alone, and with the same fears, and it was well. When I came forth, I had within me the gift I craved. Since that time, you know, all the world knows, my story. Fame, wealth, beautiful women, all earthly success is mine to command. But more than that, greater than that, is my music. I learned to compose and to play. They say his songs move the angels and the stars. I have that gift, and you who know, love, and have born within you music, you shall this night partake of the same gift." Niccolo wanted to run, to get out of this deep cavern where the steam swirled in fantastic shapes. He wanted to make the sign of the cross as he heard the bubbling and the booming from the depths ahead. And then a curious picture came to his mind, the vision of Carlo Zutio, the wine merchant's son. Carlo went to the conservatory, and he was a fool, but he had a better violin and private lessons, so that he played more masterfully than Niccolo. And his parents were wealthy, and they boasted to Niccolo's father of their son and his music. The whole town knew that Carlo would go on to the big school in Milan. He, Niccolo, would not go on. He would remain and take over the inn, and sometime when he was old and fat, he might play at country weddings for drinks. Carlo would be rich and famous, and wear silk when he returned to visit. Niccolo would no longer be a rival then, merely a country innkeeper. It was this vision, and no love of music, that came to Niccolo in the bowels of the earth. It was this vision that made him smile and follow Paganini as they advanced into the heart of the hot smoke and knelt upon the stones in the darkness. Then Paganini called a secret name, and the earth thundered. He made a sign not of the cross, and he prayed in a voice that was black and crawling. Then the mists grew red, and the thundering swelled, and Niccolo was formally introduced to his teacher. 3. Paganini had been crafty. It was a bargain. 3 years for him, and no more, where Paganini had gained 13. But the other 10 years went to the maestro as payment for leading the way. It was a fair arrangement, a business arrangement. That was what shocked Niccolo more than anything else when he returned home. It had all been so businesslike. There was behind it a terrible hint of purpose. The power knew what it was doing. There was no aimlessness, no blind evil. It was all so arranged. 3 years. But there was singing in Niccolo's heart, singing which overrode the sound of his father's quavering prayers, singing which rose to triumphant heights when he played at the conservatory the next afternoon. "Paganini taught me," is all that Niccolo would say when the faculty exclaimed. "Paganini taught me," Niccolo told Carlo with a smile. The singing rose higher as the weeks passed. Niccolo, who read notes poorly, composed. Niccolo improvised. The faculty bought him a new violin, and on the festival day it was Niccolo who appeared as soloist with the orchestra from Venice, though Carlo was second in competition for the post. Niccolo won the scholarship and went to Milan. His father prayed, but said nothing. Paganini did not write, but word came of his triumphs in France. In Milan, Niccolo was a sensation at the school. Carlo came too, his parents paying his tuition, and Carlo was successful. He studied hard, worked diligently, played expertly. But Niccolo's soaring tones were born of inspiration within. He was mastering a technique against which mere practice could not compete. Through the year it was a constant competition between the two country boys, Niccolo and Carlo. The whole school knew it. Niccolo had the talent. Carlo had the ambition. The battle for perfection was deadly. Niccolo was aging. His face was already maturing in set lines, and the color had left it set and harsh. It was whispered that his nights were spent in study that left him wasted. The truth was that Niccolo's nights were spent in fear. He was remembering the tryst in the Cave of Fools, and he was anticipating the days to come. Only 2 years now, and so much to do. He had been a fool, but Paganini's personality had overshadowed his own, dominated it. He had been led. He knew that now. Paganini had wanted a dupe so that he might make such a bargain and extend his own life at the expense of another's. That is why he had taken Niccolo. Niccolo often wondered just what might have happened had Paganini gone alone to his accounting. He wondered because in 2 years he must go, and there would be no dupe for him. 2 years. Niccolo would toss on his pillow and shudder at the thought. He could not hope to do what Paganini had done in 13. He could not win much but initial acclaim, None of the fame and the riches would be his in so short a time. But one thing he could do, beat his rival, Carlo. Niccolo hated Carlo now. He hadn't used to hate him. They had been rivals, but friendly enough. Ever since that night in the Cave of Fools, Niccolo had hated. Carlo was keeping up. Niccolo found that his work came to him almost effortlessly. His hands moved without thought along the bow, and his fingering seemed undirected. There was no triumphant thrill for him in his music, no sense of mastery in his easy playing. Carlo had this because Carlo had to work and sweat to compete, and when he did so, he felt satisfied. Moreover, aided by no supernatural gift, Carlo was competing too closely for comfort, and the school liked Carlo. The teachers knew his work and praised him for it. They did not praise Niccolo, because they could not understand his methods. He puzzled them. The other pupils liked Carlo. He had money, and he was generous. He bought sweets for his friends, laughed with them at their parties. Niccolo had no money for sweets, no fine clothes for parties. The pupils were in awe of him, and they distrusted his face. Carlo was handsome, too. The girls liked Carlo. Even Alyssa liked him, and that added to the agony of Niccolo's nights. 4. Alyssa's hair was yellow flame on a pillow. Alyssa's eyes were the jewels on the breast of passion. Alyssa's mouth was a red gateway to delight. Alyssa's arms were... It was no use. Niccolo couldn't think of anything more poetic. All he knew was that Alyssa burned within him at all times. Her beauty was like a lash across his naked heart. Actually, Alyssa Robia was a very pretty blonde student, but Niccolo was in love, and youth knows only a goddess. Alyssa walked with Carlo, and she went to parties with him, and they danced at the festival together. Throughout the second year, they were together always. Always Niccolo watched from the corner. Once or twice he spoke to the object of his worship, but she did not seem to notice him, despite his efforts to be ingratiating. She preferred the handsome Carlo. So Niccolo worked. He outplayed Carlo, though it was not easy now. Despite Niccolo's secret power, Carlo seemed inspired by love. Carlo followed his most difficult trills, mastered every detail of the well-nigh flawless technique which Niccolo mastered. Still, Niccolo triumphed always in the end. The better teachers were now confounded by the spectacle of their two notable students. Often outsiders witnessed performances. The opera sent conductors down to listen, and notables from all over the South attended the salons in local aristocratic homes when the star pupils played. Nothing was said officially, but it was understood that one or the other of the boys would be groomed for concert debut within the year. Both of them knew it, though they no longer spoke to each other. Both of them worked frantically. The final concert of the season would decide. They suspected that. Both had been asked for a performance of some solo composition. Niccolo went to work a month in advance. What took place in his dark room will never be known, but he emerged with what he felt was a true masterpiece. He had worked as never before. He would win. He would shame Carlo before them all, shame him before Alyssa. He could hardly wait for the night. The stage of the school was lighted, and the house was filled with those of a station to allow their jewels to reflect that light. Rumor had passed, and in the audience were musical notables from all Italy, and the master was there too. Yes, the great Paganini himself, come to watch Niccolo, his former pupil, they said. What a triumph! Niccolo shivered with ecstasy, fondling his violin as he waited in the wings for the solos to end. Tonight he would appear before Paganini himself when he took victory over his rival. Nothing could make his happiness more complete. Where was Carlo, by the way? He had not appeared in the wings as yet. But there he was, in the audience, with Alyssa. What did this mean? A number ended. The director was announcing his name. Unfortunately, the soloist who was to compete with Signor Niccolo this evening, Carlo Zutio, what was that? Resigned from the school. Yes. Marriage to... Married to Alyssa. He had done that. Knowing he would lose tonight, he'd given up music, retired to his father's business, and married Alyssa. And now he had arranged for it to be announced, to rob Niccolo of his victory. Bitter despair rose in Niccolo's heart, and black anger. But when his name was called, he stepped forth and played. He played his number, but it was not the original he had planned, for now he improvised, or rather, hate improvised for him. Hate tore at the strings, plucked frenetically at a flayed violin. And waves of horror crept through the house. Through red mists, the black eyes of Paganini blazed. The smile dropped from Carlo's face. The lips of Alyssa grew pale. Niccolo saw her eyes grow blank, and poured his music into them. She had never noticed him before, eh? Well, she would not forget him now. Not this, and this. Swooping to hell, spiraling to heaven, shrieking and whispering of damnation and glory, the violin sang accompaniment to dark voices that yammered in Niccolo's brain. Niccolo had no arms, no fingers. He was all violin. His body was part of the instrument, his brain a part of the song. Both were being played by another. He finished. Silence. Then the thunder. And while he bowed and smiled and the sound tore at his eardrums, his eyes blazed into Alyssa's empty face through the standing crowd. Niccolo had won and lost tonight, but he would win again. 5. They came to him after the concert. They offered him money for private study. In a year, they said, he would come back and perform in a solo concert at the school. Niccolo accepted the money gravely. It was supposed that he would use that money to spend his year in Rome, working under the great maestri as a private pupil. But Niccolo had other plans. He knew that Carlo and Alyssa would return to the village, and he meant to follow them there. He thanked the directors of the school and prepared to depart. In the hallway stood a cloaked figure. It was Paganini. Without a word, the pale genius took Niccolo's hand, just as he had that night 2 years before. Together, they walked the dark streets. "You played well tonight, my son. They said your music was like Paganini's." He smiled, and well it might be, since we study under the same master. Niccolo shuddered. "Do not fear. In a year's time you shall have had all the fame and glory you desire. The world will bow before your power. That is as you desired, no?" "No." Niccolo shook his head. "I shall not study, and I shall not go to Rome. My desire lies elsewhere." He told Paganini of Carlo and Alyssa. The maestro listened. "So you return to the village, eh? Well, if it is that what you seek, I am sure you will be aided in your quest. Do not despair." Niccolo sighed. "I am afraid of that aid. This music, this playing, it is not a part of me. It comes from other sources, and I feel no satisfaction in stirring my listeners. Carlo and Alyssa were stirred tonight, but it was the music that did it, not myself. Don't you understand?" A cold whisper bit through the darkness as Paganini spoke. "Yes, I understand perfectly, but you do not. Tonight you played through hate, and there was hate in the hall. But when you go to Alyssa, you will play through love. She will be stirred, for our master is eminently successful in amours. Let your violin speak, and she shall become yours." "But what of him? What of Carlo?" "Again, let your violin speak. It has a voice that drives men mad. Let him hear that voice." A slow laugh crawled out of Paganini's lips. "I know how it will be. Ah, I know. Years ago I discovered that secret, and well have I used it. Madden the cuckold and woo the mistress, and rejoice in the gift of the teacher. I envy you your year, my friend. It will be a great triumph for you." Niccolo's heart was pounding. "You really believe I can do it?" he asked. "Certainly. You were given the power. Let it guide you to your purpose." Paganini's voice grew grave. But it was not of that which I proposed to speak when I awaited you this evening. There is another thing. I want to remind you that a year from tonight you have an appointment in the Cave of Fools. I am afraid. It was a bargain, and you must go. What if I do not go? That I cannot speak of. He will come for you then, I know it. He will revenge himself horribly. I wish— Nicolo's voice was low with hatred. I wish that I had never met you. You led me to this, tricked me into this infernal bargain. I was a fool, and I should kill you for it. Paganini stopped and faced the youth. His eyes were ice. Perhaps, but think of the coming year. You shall win Alyssa and drive Carlo mad. Win Alyssa and drive Carlo mad. Win Alyssa and drive Carlo mad. His voice was like his violin, playing and replaying the same damnable wheedling trill until it surged through Nicolo's brain. Think not of revenge. Go to the Cave of Fools a year from tonight. But first, win Alyssa and drive Carlo mad. Still whispering the words, Paganini turned in the darkness and disappeared. And Nicolo walked the streets, muttering to himself, I shall win Alyssa and drive Carlo mad. 6. Nicolo did not stay at his father's inn when he returned. He had money now, and he procured rooms in town, rooms below the apartment of the newlywed couple he had followed. He did not see them for a month. He was in his dark room with the violin. He played in darkness now, for he needed no notes in this composition. He developed only 2 themes. One was soft and sweet and tender, thrilling with passionate beauty. As Nicolo played, his face would glow in ecstasy, and warmth flooded his being. The second theme slithered out of the darkness. Then it padded. Then it began to run and leap and dance. At first it squeaked like a rat, then it howled like a dog. Finally it bayed like a black wolf. It was a fiendish howling of terrific power, and when Nicolo played it, his hands trembled, and he closed his eyes. For a month, Nicolo played the 2 themes over and over in his tiny room, alone. Not quite alone, for there was a whispering in his brain that prompted each tone, and an unseen hand that guided the bow over the strings. Nicolo played and played, and he grew thin and gaunt. After a month, the music was a part of him, and he was ready. It took him a week to become friendly with his neighbors again. In another week, he had learned their habits, knew when Carlo worked at the wine press, and left Alyssa alone. Then, one afternoon, Nicolo visited Alyssa. She sat regal in her blonde beauty while they talked, and after a while Nicolo suggested that he play something for her. He took out his violin and drew the bow across the strings, eyes on her face. His eyes never left her face while he played. His eyes feasted on her face, as the music feasted on her soul. The tune came forth, reiterated. In endless variations it rose in soaring rhapsody, and Alyssa rose in soaring rhapsody and came toward him, her eyes empty save for the soul-filling majesty of the music. Then Nicolo put down the violin and took her in his arms. He came the next day, and the next. Always he brought his violin. Always he played, and always she surrendered to the music. For months Nicolo was happy. For many months he played each day, and his nights were peaceful at last. Carlo suspected nothing. Nicolo began to plan. In a little while he would return to Milan for the solo concert. After that he would be famous, go on tour. He had, under the inspiration of his love, written enough to ensure his success at the debut. He would take Alyssa with him, and together they would scale the heights. Then he remembered. He could not go to Milan or the concert. That night he had an appointment in the Cave of Fools. Nicolo didn't want to die. He didn't want to give his soul. That cursed bargain. But there was no way out. Every day he saw Alyssa, he longed for life with greater fervor. Knowing the end was near, he came oftener, took greater and greater chances. He was counting the hours now, the minutes. 3 days before the time appointed, he went there in the evening. Carlo would be late at the wine press, so Niccolo played. Alyssa sat there, her face blank as it always was when he played. Sometimes Niccolo would find himself wishing that he had no music to do his wooing, that he himself would inspire such adoration in the woman he loved. But that was too much to hope for. Alyssa loved Carlo, and only the music gave her to Niccolo. It sufficed. The spell was strong. Niccolo played tonight as he had never played before, and as the music arose, it drowned out the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Carlo was in the room. Niccolo stopped playing. Alyssa's eyes opened, as though she were wakening from profound depths of sleep, and Carlo faced them both. He was a big man, Carlo, with strong hands that now opened and closed convulsively at his sides. Carlo's heavy body was lunging across the room, and the hands moved for Niccolo's throat. They never reached it. Niccolo's delicate hands were on the violin. He began to play. It was not the love strain that he played this time. It was the other, the song of madness. At the sound of the rat-like squeaking, Carlo stopped. Niccolo watched him as the shrieking mounted. Carlo's eyes grew wide. The shrieking became a moan. Carlo's wide eyes were growing red. The moaning was a rising bark, a yelp of agony. Carlo's hands went to his head. He stepped back, sank to his knees. Then Niccolo played. The violin screamed. The bow moved up and down upon it like a red-hot poker descending on human flesh. Niccolo played until Carlo lay rolling on the floor, baying in rhythm as the foam poured from his lips. Niccolo played until the room pulsed with horrid sound, until the glass shivered with the vibration, and the candlelight wavered, and the flame danced in agony. Niccolo played, and then he stopped. Carlo lay there moaning, and he rose to his knees and looked at Niccolo. Then he looked at Alyssa. Niccolo followed his glance. Alyssa. He had forgotten Alyssa. He had played the music of madness and forgotten she was in the room. Alyssa lay where she had fallen, and her face was white with the unmistakable whiteness of death. Carlo looked at her and began to laugh. Niccolo sobbed. Tears rolled down his cheeks. Husband and lover laughed and sobbed together. It was all over. She was dead and he was mad. And 2 nights from now, Niccolo must go to that rendezvous in the Cave of Fools. So this was Satan's gift. This awful mockery was what it had brought him. The dead woman lay on the floor as the madman crawled toward her, cackling. Niccolo rose to go. His bow accidentally scraped the strings. The mad Carlo rose, laughing, and seized the violin. He broke it across the bridge and hurled it from the window. Still laughing, he turned, but there was no sane hatred in his eyes. And then the thought came to Niccolo. "Carlo," he whispered. "Carlo." The idiot husband laughed. "Carlo, your wife is dead, but I did not kill her, I swear it. It was the devil, Carlo, the devil who dwells in the Cave of Fools. You want to avenge your wife's death, don't you, Carlo? Then seek out the devil 2 nights from tonight in the Cave of Fools. Remember, Carlo, 2 nights from tonight in the Cave of Fools. I will stay with you until then, and tell you where to go." The madman laughed. Softly, Niccolo repeated his suggestion. He whispered it all that night as the deranged Carlo slept. He whispered it the next day as they sat beside the body of the dead woman. At last, when Niccolo rose to leave on the coach for Milan, he felt that Carlo understood and would go. Smiling, the violinist withdrew, leaving the chuckling lunatic and his dead wife in the dark room. 7. In the night of travel, Niccolo smiled bitterly, but often. It had worked out after all. He would trick Satan then, sending Carlo in his stead. Thus he could play the concert and go on to fame. Poor Alyssa was dead, of course, but there were other women to hear the song of love. It was good. It was good to hear the praise in Milan. His old teacher spoke. His friends gathered around him and whispered of the celebrities who would attend the concert tonight. Niccolo was so busy that day that he forgot a very important item. Indeed, he had just finished a meal in his dressing room when he remembered. Carlo had broken his violin. Confused by tragedy, by lack of sleep, and overmuch planning, it had slipped Niccolo's thoughts. His violin, not a precious instrument to him, for Niccolo knew that he could produce his music on any violin. Still, it was necessary. He rose to summon the director when the door opened. Carlo entered. Carlo was mad. His eyes glittered and his teeth were bared, but he walked erect. He was able to control himself sufficiently to pass unnoticed, it seemed. Niccolo, beholding him, nearly froze on the spot. A wave of fear rose chokingly in his throat. "Carlo, why are you here? Don't you remember? The Cave of Fools and your appointment?" Carlo grinned. "I went last night, Niccolo," he whispered. "I went last night. Tonight I am here to see you play. You will be playing soon, Niccolo." Niccolo stammered wildly. But what did you find in the cave? I mean, there was one who waited, and he wanted something from you?" Carlo grinned wider. "Do not trouble yourself. I gave him what he wanted. It was all arranged last night." "You mean that?" Niccolo whispered. "You gave your soul?" "I gave my soul. We made a bargain." Carlo chuckled. "Then why are you here?" "To bring you this. I broke your violin, and tonight you must play." Carlo thrust a bundle into Niccolo's hands. At that moment the prompter entered. "Maestro, the concert is starting. You are wanted on stage. Oh, what a crowd is here for your debut. There has never been such a tribute. You played but once a year ago, but they remember and have returned. It is wonderful. But hurry, hurry." Niccolo left, and the grinning Carlo followed, standing in the wings as the violinist stepped on the stage. In his confusion, Niccolo unwrapped the parcel and tossed the paper to the wings as he took the violin and bow in his hands and faced the applauding audience. Niccolo's eyes sparkled. This was triumph. His heart was light within him. Fame was here, and poor Carlo had settled matters with the master. He had made a bargain, and that did not concern Niccolo. What concerned him was that he was free, and this was the greatest evening of his life, and he would play as he had never played before. Automatically, he gripped the violin and raised it to his chin. It felt heavy, an ordinary instrument, but it would suffice. Poor Carlo was mad, bringing a violin to the man who had killed his wife. But play. Yes, play with the devil's gift. Play the devil's love song that won Alyssa. Let it win the audience tonight. What matter the violin or Carlo chuckling in the wings? Play. Niccolo played. His bow stroked the opening strains of the melody, but a droning arose. What was wrong? Niccolo tried to correct his stroke, but his fingers moved automatically. He tried to stop, but his fingers, his wrist, his arm moved on. He could not stop. The power within him would not swerve, and the droning increased. This was the song of madness. Niccolo's fingers flew, his arm flailed. He fought, trying to hold back, but the sounds increased. Rats scurried and chittered, and then the hounds of hell began to bark. Fiends brayed in his brain. Yes, in his brain. The audience, he dimly realized, was hooting and jeering. They were not being driven mad by the music. He was. Niccolo closed his eyes, clenched his jaw to make the violin slip, and still it played. He wanted to think of something else, anything but the music that now shrieked in his skull. A vision of Paganini's satanic face, of Alyssa's dead features, of Carlo's mad red eyes, of the black cave of fools where he should be tonight. These things swept on wings of horror through his brain. And then the music broke through, and Niccolo fiddled madly. Eyes jerked open and stared down at the violin, at the coarse wood, the peculiar strings, the ghastly bridge glistening with pearly brilliance. And then the voice of the music screamed the truth to him. Mad Carlo had gone to the Cave of Fools last night to make a bargain. He had said that, and Niccolo had believed that it meant he was free. But what had that bargain been? Carlo had sold his soul for vengeance. What could that vengeance be? That one had told him to make this violin. And now Niccolo stared at the violin he was helplessly playing, but which made a music that drove him mad. Niccolo stared at the coarse wood. He had seen such wood before. Where? Why did it remind him of Alyssa? The wood was stained red, ghastly red. Why did the red stain remind him of Alyssa? Music thundered in Niccolo's ears, and still he played and stared. The glistening bridge of the violin was pearly. Why did that bridge remind him of Alyssa? The bridge grinned up at Niccolo, grinned insanely as Alyssa had grinned when she was driven mad by music. The violin tones rose to a shattering crescendo, and Niccolo staggered. His blurring eyes glanced at the golden strings of the violin that were singing his doom. In a burst of ghastly fear, he seemed to recognize them. Why did those strings remind him of Alyssa? And then he understood. The music he was playing was the music that had driven her to madness, to death. In some way, this violin now held her soul. He was not playing a violin. He was playing her soul, and its madness was pouring out to drive him mad. He looked down again as the shrieking music rose in his ears, and he saw. He did not hold a violin in his arms, but the dead body of a woman, the body of Alyssa. He was playing on her body, playing on the grey ghost of her body, drawing the bow across long golden strands that he recognized in a final burst of fear that tore his brain to shreds. Niccolo played her body like a violin, and drew the madness out into his own being, and then he recognized the wood, the stain, the bridge, and the horribly familiar strings. That was why Alyssa's soul was in the violin. Niccolo suddenly began to laugh insanely, and the music rose to drown out his laughter as he held the horrible thing playing in his arms. Then, with a lurch, Niccolo fell, face black with agony. The curtains dropped. The hysterical manager ran to the dead body of the violinist. Then the madman that was Carlo crept slyly from the wings and crouched over the body, tittering in a shrill voice. He took the violin from the dead Niccolo's breast and laughed. His fingers lovingly caressed the wood he had carved from Alyssa's coffin, the stain of blood he had drawn from Alyssa's body, the pearly teeth on the bridge he had taken from Alyssa's throat. And finally, his fingers fell to stroking the long, smooth golden strings on which the music of madness had been played, the long, golden strands of dead Alyssa's hair. If you enjoyed listening today, be sure to subscribe to the channel by hitting the red subscribe button below. After doing so, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to receive new content notifications. If you'd like to support our work and receive exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. To support us in other ways, see the video description for links to our Bandcamp and Patreon pages, our merch store over at Teespring, and further information relating to our releases on Audible, iTunes, and Spotify. And until next time,